You ever do everything right? Pay your share, keep to yourself, try to help out, and still get treated like you don't matter? That's what happened to me. One minute I had a place to live and work in peace. The next, I didn't even have a room. Please stay with me as I tell you my story, and please don't forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved one. I live in a small town called Crest, Ohio. I'm 23 years old, and yeah, I still live at home. Not exactly what I pictured, but it made sense. I wasn't just laying around doing nothing. I paid rent, I covered the electric bill, and I even paid for my mom's phone plan every month. On top of that, I work from home. I'm a freelance content creator, and I'd put a lot of time and money into turning my room into a proper home studio. Camera, mic, lights, soundproofing, the whole setup. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. I had my space. I was building my career. I had a system. Then everything changed. Fast. It happened one random Tuesday evening. I came home after running errands, arms full of groceries, and the first thing I noticed was an extra pair of kids' shoes by the door. 2 pairs, actually, tiny beat-up sneakers like they belonged to elementary school kids. I paused for a second, confused. I didn't remember any of my siblings inviting friends over. It wasn't a big deal, though. I figured I'd ask later. As I stepped into the kitchen, I saw my mom leaning against the counter, drinking coffee with someone I hadn't seen in years, Rachel, her old best friend from back when I was a kid. She looked different now, tired, thinner, like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, and her eyes kept darting around like she was waiting for something bad to happen. Sitting quietly next to her were 2 kids, probably around 6 or 8. They didn't say anything, just sat on the floor, playing with some action figures and whispering to each other. I could tell they were shy. They looked a little nervous, kind of like they didn't know if they were allowed to be there. Before I could even say anything, my mom smiled at me and said, "Oh, hey, you remember Rachel, right?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah. What's going on?" "She's going to be staying here for a while," my mom said. "Just for a few weeks. Things are complicated right now." I didn't ask any more questions right then. The way she said it told me enough. I could guess what was going on. Rachel looked like someone who'd been dragged through something rough and was barely hanging on. Later that night, when the kids were asleep and Rachel had gone to bed, I asked my mom what the full story was. She sighed like she'd been holding it in. "Her husband," she said, "is a nightmare. Controlling, he kicked her out. She's trying to get a lawyer, but she has no money, and no one else would take her in. I couldn't let her go to a shelter with those kids." She looked at me like she was expecting me to say something against it. But I didn't. I just nodded and said, "All right," because honestly, I got it. Life can be brutal. People fall apart. And if you're lucky enough to have a friend willing to help you back up, you take the help. Rachel was clearly in a bad spot, and I wasn't heartless. She and her kids moved into the guest room the next day. The room was small, barely enough for 1 adult, let alone a mom and 2 kids. But they made it work. I saw her hauling in bags of clothes and blankets. My mom helped her push in an extra mattress from the basement. We even had to clear out a pile of storage boxes to make space. It was tight, but I figured, all right, this is temporary. A couple of weeks, maybe a month. She'd get some legal help, find her footing, and move into a place of her own. Until then, I could live with a little noise, a little extra chaos. It was the right thing to do. I told myself that again and again. At first, things were fine. The kids were loud sometimes, yeah, but they weren't bad. Just kids being kids. I'd hear them chasing each other through the hallway, their feet thudding like tiny elephants, and I'd just put my headphones on. I didn't even complain when one of them knocked over a picture frame in the living room. Stuff happens. Rachel was trying. She'd cook dinner a couple times a week, clean the bathroom without being asked, and always said, "Thank you," like she meant it. I could see she was embarrassed, trying not to be a burden. It made me feel better about the whole thing. Honestly, if things had stayed like that, I wouldn't be telling this story. But they didn't stay like that. They changed fast. About 2 weeks after Rachel moved in, I came back from running errands one afternoon. Nothing big, just a trip to the pharmacy and a stop for coffee. I was tired, hoping to get back to editing a project I'd fallen behind on. I remember walking up the stairs, holding my iced coffee, thinking about how I'd fix the lighting on a video that was due soon. Then I noticed something. My bedroom door was wide open. That was strange. I always kept it shut when I wasn't in there. I had expensive gear, my mic, my lights, my camera, and I liked to be careful. I walked up to the door, and before I could even step inside, I heard loud giggling and thumping sounds from the other side. My heart sank. I pushed the door open. Both of Rachel's kids were inside, jumping on my bed like it was a trampoline. One of them had my headphones wrapped around his neck. The other was mashing random buttons on my keyboard. My mic stand was crooked, the boom arm loose. My camera, was shoved into the corner next to a pile of stuffed animals like it was just some forgotten toy. It didn't even feel real at first. I just stood there, blinking. "What are you doing?" I said louder than I meant to. The kids froze. One of them dropped my mouse on the floor with a loud clack. I rushed over and grabbed it before they could do more damage. That's when my mom walked in behind me. She looked calm, like this wasn't a big deal at all. "Hey," she said casually, "don't yell at them. They're just playing." "In my room?" I snapped. "With my stuff?" "They needed more space," she said, as if that explained everything. "The guest room's too small. They've been cramped up in there all week." I stared at her. "So you let them into my room?" Without asking me, she gave me a look like I was the one being unreasonable. "Calm down. It's not the end of the world. They're just kids." "That's not the point," I said, my voice shaking now. "This is my room. I work in here. This is where I make my living. My gear isn't for kids to mess around with." She waved her hand dismissively. "You're being dramatic. They were just curious. They're not going to break anything." "They were jumping on the bed," I said, touching my equipment. "You can't just walk into someone's space and treat it like a playground." My mom rolled her eyes. "You act like you own the house." I could feel the frustration rising in my chest. "I pay rent. I pay the bills. I pay your phone plan. And now I don't even have a private space to work because your friend's kids wanted more room to play." "It's just temporary," she said, clearly tired of the conversation. "You've got to stop making such a big deal out of everything." But it was a big deal. This wasn't just about noise or kids being messy. It was about respect. This was my room, my setup, my job. I looked around the room, at the mess, the toys, the clutter, and suddenly it didn't feel like my space anymore. That was the first time I realized I might not be welcome in my own home. After that mess in my room, I couldn't just let it go. Later that evening, I sat down with my mom in the living room. I was still upset, but I wanted to keep the conversation calm. I figured maybe if I explained everything clearly, she'd understand where I was coming from. "Mom," I started, "that equipment in my room? It's not just random stuff. It's worth over $3,000. That camera alone cost me months of saving. The mic, the lights, the editing software, all of it is part of my job. I don't just play around with it. It's how I make money." She didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me, like I was overreacting. "You act like I don't get it," she said finally. "But they're kids. They weren't trying to break anything." "That doesn't matter," I said. "Accidents happen. They could delete a project, knock over the mic, spill something on the camera. I can't afford to replace any of it right now." "You're being selfish," she said, and I actually felt my chest tighten. "Rachel and the kids are going through something really hard, and all you care about is your stuff." "My stuff is how I pay rent," I said, trying not to raise my voice. "You're telling me I'm selfish because I don't want kids crawling all over the tools I use to make a living?" Right then, Rachel walked in from the hallway. I didn't even know she was nearby. "Oh, come on," she said, her arms crossed. "They weren't hurting anything. They're just curious. Maybe if you weren't so uptight, they'd listen to you." I turned to her, stunned. "Uptight? I'm trying to protect my livelihood. I've spent years building that setup piece by piece. If anything breaks, I'm screwed. You think that's being uptight?" Rachel just rolled her eyes. "They're kids. You can't expect them to know what's off limits unless you relax a little." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not letting them touch any of it. Period. This isn't about being relaxed. This is about boundaries." "You think I'm just letting them destroy your stuff?" she asked, her tone suddenly defensive. "I think no one should have let them into my room to begin with," I said. "That door should have stayed shut." "Selfish," she muttered under her breath. And that word, again, it really got to me. I looked at both of them, trying to stay calm. I didn't say they couldn't stay in the house. I didn't say they had to leave. I said they shouldn't be in my room. That's not selfish. That's reasonable. But it didn't matter what I said. My mom and Rachel were already on the same side. To them, I was the problem. That night, I went back upstairs and looked at my gear. I carefully reset everything, checked for damage, and tried to focus on the editing work I was behind on. But my hands were shaking. Every time I touched the mouse or adjusted a mic setting, all I could think was, what if they come in again tomorrow? The space didn't feel safe anymore. It didn't feel like mine. And from the way things were going, I had a feeling this wasn't the end of it. The next morning, I didn't sleep in like usual. I couldn't. My head was spinning all night. I kept thinking about my equipment, my work, my room, not knowing if the kids would barge in again, or if more of my stuff would get shoved into corners like junk. I decided I needed to try one more time. Try to be the reasonable one. So after breakfast, while Rachel was out with the kids, I sat down with my mom again. She was scrolling through her phone on the couch, her glasses sliding down her nose like always. "Mom," I said calmly, "can we talk for a second?" She gave me a tired look. "What now?" "I have an idea. A compromise." She set her phone down slowly. "Okay, I'll switch rooms," I said. Let them have my room if it's really that big of a deal. But I need space for my equipment, so I'll move my stuff into the guest room. That way I can still work, and they can have the extra space. She didn't even take 2 seconds to think about it. No, she said flatly. I blinked. Why not? The guest room is too cramped. Your studio gear would never fit in there. It's already tight with the 3 of them. But that's the point, I said, trying to keep my cool. They're kids. They don't need a whole room to themselves. All I'm asking is for space to do my work. My mom just shook her head. You don't get to decide what other people need. Rachel's situation is hard enough as it is. You're just going to have to deal with it until she gets back on her feet. For how long? I asked. A week? A month? 6 months? As long as it takes, she replied. You don't get to put a deadline on someone else's struggles. I felt the air leave my lungs. I'm not trying to be cold, Mom, I said. But I pay for that room. I didn't agree to give it up. You didn't even ask. She crossed her arms and leaned back like she was done talking. It's my house. I decide what happens in it. That line again. Like I was just some guy couch surfing, not the person covering the electricity bill. I didn't say anything else. I just went upstairs and shut my door. What was left of it, anyway. But as I passed the hallway, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. I paused. It was my mom and Rachel. They didn't know I was still home. He's always been like this, my mom said, her voice low. So stubborn. Everything has to be on his terms. Rachel laughed. He doesn't get it. He's not a parent. He doesn't understand what it's like to go through something like this. I told him it's temporary, my mom added. But he acts like we've ruined his whole life. Well, maybe now he knows what it's like when things aren't about him, Rachel said. Honestly, he's lucky you even let him stay here this long. Lucky. I felt something twist in my chest. These people, the ones I was helping, the ones I was paying bills for, were sitting downstairs talking about me like I was the burden. Like I was the problem. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just being ignored. I was being dismissed. And that's when I started to think, maybe I needed to leave. Not later. Soon. After hearing that conversation in the kitchen, I just stood there for a while, frozen on the stairs. I didn't feel angry. Not at first. I felt small. Smaller than I'd felt in a long time. I had been trying so hard to be understanding, to be flexible, to offer solutions. And instead of any appreciation, I was being talked about like I was some spoiled, selfish kid who didn't get it. And by my own mom. I walked back to my room, shut the door gently, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands rested on my knees, still for a moment. Everything in the room felt weirdly quiet, like the walls had shifted, and nothing belonged to me anymore. That's when it finally clicked in my head. They don't respect me. They don't support me. They don't even see me. To them, I was just the guy paying bills, filling in the gaps, a backup plan. And now that I wasn't going along with whatever they wanted, I was suddenly the problem, the selfish one, the difficult one. And that's when the decisions started forming in my head, not all at once, but piece by piece. I need to move out. It felt ridiculous at first. I wasn't ready. I didn't have savings lined up for something like that. I liked living at home. It was comfortable, it was affordable, and until recently, it had felt like home. But suddenly, none of those things felt real anymore. What good was comfort when your door didn't lock, your work wasn't respected, and the people around you made you feel like a nuisance? So that night, I opened up my laptop and started browsing rental listings. Just looking at them made me nervous. Studio apartments, rooms in shared houses, basement units in older neighborhoods. Most of them were overpriced, especially for a freelancer with unpredictable income. But I didn't close the tabs. I kept scrolling, saving the ones that looked even slightly manageable. I even made a spreadsheet. Rent price, location, distance to the nearest grocery store, Wi-Fi included or not. I spent the whole night doing it. No music, no snacks, just quiet clicking and thinking. The kind of quiet you feel in your chest. The next day, I didn't say anything to my mom. I didn't bring up the conversation I'd overheard. I didn't tell her I was looking to leave. There was no point, not yet. Instead, I kept things normal on the surface. I washed the dishes. I answered a couple emails. I did some light editing work that didn't require audio. And in the background, I kept checking my phone for responses from landlords. A few listings replied. One said the room was taken. Another asked if I smoked or had pets. A third one sounded promising. Small room, upstairs in a quiet house, rented by a guy who worked nights and wasn't home much. The rent was a stretch, but not impossible. I didn't tell anyone, but deep down I knew. This was no longer just about the room. It wasn't even about Rachel or the kids anymore. It was about the way I was being treated. Like I was invisible. Like what I needed didn't matter. And I realized something. If I didn't take care of myself, no one else was going to. So I kept searching. Quietly. Determined. Because one way or another, I was getting out. A few nights later, after everyone had gone to bed and the house had gone quiet, I knew it was time. The kids were asleep. Rachel had retreated to the guest room with the door closed. My siblings were upstairs, probably watching something on their phone. My mom was on the living room couch, blanket over her legs, TV playing some home renovation show with the volume low. I walked in and sat down across from her. She didn't look away from the screen. "What now?" she asked, already sounding annoyed. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice calm. She turned the volume down with the remote, but didn't mute it. "If this is about the room again." "It is," I said. "But I'm not here to argue." She sighed and leaned back, arms crossed. "I'm just going to be honest," I continued. "I can't live like this anymore. Either Rachel and the kids move out of my room, or I move out of the house." Her eyes locked on mine for the first time. "Are you serious?" "I'm completely serious," I said. "I've been patient. I've tried to make it work. I offered compromises. I've been respectful, but I'm done feeling like I don't belong in my own home." She looked stunned for a moment, like the words took a second to register. "You're overreacting," she said slowly. "This is still temporary. You're blowing everything out of proportion." "It's not about time anymore," I replied. "It's about respect. You made a decision about my space, without even asking me. I pay rent, I pay bills, and I've been treated like my needs don't matter." She threw the blanket off her lap and sat up straighter. "Where exactly do you plan on going?" "I've already been looking," I said. "I found a couple places. It's not going to be easy, but I'm figuring it out." "You're bluffing," she said. "You don't have that kind of money. You've never lived on your own." "I'll manage," I said, "because anything is better than feeling like I'm invisible in my own home." There was a long pause between us. The TV played quietly in the background, showing someone painting a kitchen wall blue. My mom stared past me, like she didn't want to admit I might be serious. "You're really willing to walk away," she said finally. "Just because I asked you to share?" "No," I replied, "because you didn't ask. You decided. You didn't even talk to me about it. You gave away my room. And when I spoke up, you and Rachel made me feel like I was the problem." "I needed to help her," she said, as if that explained everything. "I didn't say don't help her," I said. "But helping someone doesn't mean steamrolling someone else. There were other options. But instead, you made it clear, my comfort, my job, my space, none of it matters." She stared at me for a moment. I could see something shift in her expression, uncertainty, maybe even a little fear. But she didn't apologize. She didn't back down. "You're making a mistake," she said finally. "You'll see that once you're out there." "Maybe," I said. "But at least if I fall, it'll be on my terms." I stood up, paused, then added, "You can think about it, but I'm not waiting long." And with that, I walked upstairs feeling like, for the first time in a long time, I'd actually said what I needed to say. I didn't wait for her to think about it. A few days after our late-night talk, I finalized the rental. It wasn't much, just a single room on the second floor of an old house a few blocks from downtown Crest, but it was mine. The rent was tight, but I'd crunched the numbers. I could make it work if I cut back on extras. I picked Saturday morning to move. Quietly, no announcements, no dramatic exits. Just me and two friends who'd offered to help. They showed up early with coffee and a rental van. We stood on the sidewalk, talking in low voices while the sun came up. The house looked peaceful from the outside, like nothing was wrong inside. But I knew better. We headed straight for my room, my former room. I hadn't stepped inside since that first explosion. I'd been keeping my distance, staying out of the way, working from cafes and borrowed desks at friends' places. But now it was time. I opened the door and just stood there for a second. The bed was covered in stuffed animals and kid clothes. My posters were gone from the wall. My gaming chair had been dragged across the floor and now sat under a pile of crayons and broken plastic toys. My camera, mic, and laptop were still in the corner, but covered in a thin layer of dust. They looked like museum pieces, untouched and forgotten. I heard someone behind me. "What are you doing?" It was Rachel, standing in the hallway with a mug of coffee in hand, wearing oversized pajamas and an irritated look. "I'm moving my stuff out," I said flatly. She stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "This is their room now. You don't just get to walk in whenever you feel like it." I looked her straight in the eye. "No, this is my room. I paid rent for it. That's my equipment in the corner. This space was mine before you ever showed up." Her tone sharpened. "You're being ridiculous." "No," I said, walking past her and into the room. "What's ridiculous is being locked out of a room I pay for. What's ridiculous is being told I'm selfish because I don't want kids breaking the tools I use for work." She stood in the doorway, blocking half the light. "This is a hard time for us. I thought you understood that." "I did," I said, picking up my camera and inspecting the lens. "But I can't keep pretending like none of this affects me." I tried. I was patient. I offered solutions, and all I got in return was disrespect. At that point, my friends started coming in behind me with boxes. One of them had his phone out, recording, not to post anywhere, just to have in case someone tried to say I was stealing or making a scene. Rachel muttered something under her breath and walked away, slamming the bathroom door as she passed. We spent the next hour packing. Every piece of gear, every cable, my backup drives, my clothes, a few books and old notebooks from under the bed. It felt strange pulling it all out, like I was erasing myself from the house, piece by piece. We loaded the van quietly. My mom still hadn't come downstairs. By the time we were done, the room was nearly empty, just the mattress, a few forgotten crayons, and a chair with a missing wheel. I stood in the doorway one last time, looking around. It didn't feel like my room anymore, and honestly, I didn't want it to. I didn't even get to enjoy the first full day in my new place before the messages started. My phone lit up with a wall of notifications, all from my mom. At first, it was confusion. Where are you? Did you really just leave like that? Then, just a few minutes later, it shifted into anger. You can't just leave in the middle of the month. You still owe rent for the next 2 weeks. I read the text slowly, sitting in my new room, surrounded by half-open boxes and tangled extension cords. My camera was resting on my desk. My mic was already set up. For the first time in weeks, everything was where I wanted it to be. I took a deep breath and typed a reply. I'm not paying rent. I'm not living there anymore. She answered immediately. That's not how it works. You know I rely on that money. You didn't even give me time to prepare. I stared at the screen. Ask Rachel to help with the bills, I typed back. Or her ex. Or someone else. I'm not paying to be disrespected. She didn't respond for a while after that. But the next morning, I woke up to another storm of texts, longer this time, full of guilt and accusations. You're tearing this family apart. You've embarrassed me. I can't believe you'd abandon me after everything I've done for you. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. A few days later, my younger sister called. Her voice was quiet, uncertain, like she was caught in the middle of a fight she didn't want to be. Mom's freaking out, she said. She says she can't cover the bills without your help. I'm sorry she's stressed, I said. But this was her choice. She treated me like I didn't matter. And I couldn't stay. She says you're being cold, my sister murmured. That you're just punishing her because of Rachel. I sighed. I'm not trying to punish anyone. I just needed space. I tried to fix it. She didn't want to listen. There was a long pause. Then she said, It's just weird without you here. I know, I said. I didn't want things to end this way either. She didn't defend our mom, not really. But she didn't take my side either. She was stuck, trying to hold peace between people who weren't willing to meet in the middle. I understood that. I told her I loved her and to take care of herself. We hung up shortly after. I sat in silence for a while. This wasn't how I imagined things turning out, but I didn't feel guilty. Not anymore. I'd made the right decision, for my sanity, for my work, and for the respect I wasn't getting at home. My new place wasn't fancy, a small room in an older house with creaky floors and peeling paint. But it was mine. Quiet, private, safe. Within a day, I had my studio set up again. My mic, camera, and editing gear all in their proper spots, untouched and working like they should. For the first time in weeks, I could sit at my desk and actually focus. The stress I'd been carrying melted away bit by bit. I could think clearly. My freelance work picked up again, and I finally started meeting deadlines without feeling like I was drowning. Then, like clockwork, the drama followed me digitally. A cousin sent me a screenshot from Facebook. It was a long, dramatic post from my mom, saying her ungrateful son abandoned her during a time of need, left her to handle everything, and acted like the victim. She didn't mention the part where she gave my room away, or that I paid her bills, or that I tried to compromise. I almost responded. I almost posted my side. But then I didn't. Let her say what she wanted. I knew the truth. So did anyone who actually cared. Now, a month later, I'm settled. The room is small, sure, but it's peaceful. I work, I sleep, I breathe. And most importantly, I feel respected. Not by her. Not by Rachel. By myself. And that's what I really needed. I don't regret leaving. I don't regret choosing myself. All I wanted was space, support, and respect. If standing up for that made me selfish, then fine. At least now, I'm living life on my own terms. And I'm not looking back. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Was I right to leave and start fresh? Or should I have stayed and tried to make it work with my mom? Let me know in the comments. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new one.